नमस्कार दोस्तों, एक बार फिर से आपका स्वागत है हमारे यूट्यूब चैनल में। आज का वीडियो बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग होने वाला है दोस्तों। तो आज हम आ गए हैं सेंट मेरी गिल्ड हॉल में। जैसा कि दोस्तों मैंने अपने प्रीवियस वीडियो में आप सभी को प्रॉमिस किया था कि मैं एक नया वीडियो लेके आऊँगा जिसमें मैं इस गिल्ड हॉल के बारे में एक्सप्लेन करूँगा। तो अगर आपने मेरा प्रीवियस वीडियो चेकआउट नहीं किया है जो कि कोवेंट्री कैथेड्रल के ऊपर है, तो कृपया जाके चेकआउट करें। वो भी बहुत इन्फॉर्मेटिव है दोस्तों। हम आगे बढ़ते हैं। तो ये जो है ये गिल्ड हॉल है। इसमें जो मेन एंट्रेंस वाला एरिया है, ये जहाँ पर ये अभी हम लोग खड़े हैं, ये एंट्रेंस का जो बोलते हैं पॉर्च एरिया है और साइड में टेल्स ऑफ टी है। तो आप यहाँ पर ही कहा जाता है बहुत पुराने ज़माने से यहाँ पर ही वो पर्टिकुलर यहाँ पर ही मार्केट हुआ करता था। और यहाँ का जो बिल्डिंग है दोस्तों, इसका बहुत ही पुराना हिस्ट्री रहा है दोस्तों। ये 14 सेंचुरी में बनाया गया है और गिल्ड हॉल में बहुत सारे इवेंट्स और पर्सनालिटीज़ को विटनेस किए हैं। तो चलिए हम लोग अंदर जाते हैं, देखते हैं। एंट्रेंस से हम लोग जैसे ही एंटर करते हैं तो आगे में एक रिसेप्शन आप देखने को मिलता है। यहाँ पर एक लेडी थे, इस लेडी से पूछने पे पता चलता है कि यहाँ पर ही एंट्री फीस है। तो मैंने पूछा कि एंट्री फीस कितनी है, तो उन्होंने बताया कि 11.5 पाउंड्स जो है लगेंगे अगर आप नॉन रेसिडेंट है, अगर आप टूरिस्ट है। और अगर आप यहाँ के रेसिडेंट है, अगर आप यहाँ रह रहे हैं, अगर आपके पास कुछ भी रेसिडेंस प्रूफ है तो आप वो दिखा दोगे तो आपको 7 पाउंड्स में एंट्री मिल जाएगी। क्योंकि दोस्तों मेरे पास एक रेसिडेंट प्रूफ था जो कि मेरा होटल का था और मेरे पास बीआरपी कार्ड भी था। तो दोस्तों मुझे फ्री एंट्री मिल नॉट फ्री एंट्री लाइक 7 पाउंड्स मिल गई, मुझे डिस्काउंट मिल गई। तो आप भी आ रहे हैं, अगर आप स्टूडेंट हैं तो आप अपना स्टूडेंट वीज़ा के साथ हैं, तो अगर आप कहीं रह रहे हैं उस लोकेशन का आप एड्रेस अपना पोस्ट कोड बता दीजिए, बस ये आपका नाम पे रजिस्ट्रेशन करेंगे और आपको डिस्काउंट मिल जाएगा दोस्तों। आई थिंक आपको यहाँ ज़रूर आना चाहिए। ये 7 पाउंड टोटली वर्थ इट है दोस्तों। अगर आप कोवेंट्री के हिस्ट्री को जानना चाहते हो तो ये बहुत ही अच्छा म्यूज़ियम है दोस्तों। यहाँ पर ही सब कुछ दिखाया गया है, अप लाइक अप राइट फ्रॉम द मेडिवल एज अप टू द 14 सेंचुरी, किस तरह से सब कुछ रहा था उस टाइम पे, और कुछ कुछ रिमेन्स जो बच गए हैं आप राइट अवे एक्सपीरियंस कर सकते हैं। जो पूरा हिस्ट्री जो रहा है कोवेंट्री का, वो सारा कुछ आपको यहाँ पर ही जानने को मिलेगा। बहुत ही इन्फॉर्मेटिव होने वाला है दोस्तों। इस वीडियो के पूरे अंत तक बने रहे, आपको पूरी जानकारी दी जाएगी। अगर आपको ये वीडियो, मेरी जो वीडियो सीरीज आती है, ये आपको अच्छा लगता है तो कृपया लाइक करें, सब्सक्राइब करें और अपने दोस्तों के साथ शेयर करें। तो दोस्तों यहाँ पर ही आप जैसे देख सकते हैं, मैं कुछ मैगजीन्स देख रहा हूँ यहाँ पर ही पड़ी हुई थी। तो आई थिंक ये गाइडेड मैगजीन्स है, आप इनमें से कोई भी एक उठा सकते हैं। दोस्तों हम आगे जाते हैं, देखते हैं आगे क्या है। दोस्तों जैसे ही हम आगे बढ़ते हैं तो आपको दिखेगा ये बड़ा सा हॉल है दोस्तों। जैसे ही मैंने एंट्रेंस किया था इस गिल्ड हॉल में, तो जो रिसेप्शन में लेडी थी उसने बताया कि इस गिल्ड हॉल का लाइक अभी अभी रिफॉर्मेशन हुआ है आफ्टर लाइक द ग्रेट कंट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट, राइट। तो आप इसे लाइक चालू रखने के लिए इसमें बहुत सारे इवेंट्स वगैरह होते हैं, लाइक प्राइवेट इवेंट्स के साथ साथ पब्लिक इवेंट्स होते हैं। तो ये हॉल जो है उसलिए यूज़ किया जाता है।
ये भी एक यहाँ जो कोवेंट्री के कैथेड्रल है इसी के सामने है। ये भी एक हिस्टोरिक मॉन्यूमेंट है, बट इसको अभी रिनोवेट किया गया है और इसको एक तरह का एक कॉमन गैदरिंग प्लेस की तरह इसको यूज़ किया जाता है। जैसे कि किसी की शादी हो या फिर कुछ भी इवेंट ऑर्गेनाइज करना हो तो ये प्लेस को यूज़ किया जाता है। तो चलिए दिखाते हैं आपको यहाँ का नज़ारा।
दोस्तों ये था बड़ा सा हॉल वाला ऑडिटोरियम। यहाँ पर ही फंक्शंस वगैरह होते हैं। यहाँ पर ही अगर किसी का मैरिज फंक्शन है या फिर किसी की रिंग सेरेमनी है तो ये यहाँ पर ही होती है। और बाकी सब डोर्स में एक्सेस नहीं था दोस्तों, ओनली फॉर स्टाफ था, तो मुझे आगे बढ़ना पड़ा। तो मैं जब यहाँ आता हूँ रिसेप्शन में वापस, तो वो गाइड करते हैं कि मुझे इस तरफ जाना पड़ेगा। और ये है दोस्तों, ये जो रास्ता है नीचे, ये लेके जाता है मुझे जो सीढ़ी वाली रास्ती थी वो हमें लेके जाता है ग्रेट हॉल की तरफ। और ये जो रास्ता है दोस्तों, ये मेन स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट है, यहाँ से हम लोग चलेंगे किचन रूम। दोस्तों ये जो गिल्ड हॉल है 2 फ्लोर्स में डिवाइडेड है। द फर्स्ट फ्लोर में जो है उसमें है आपका द किचन। ये जो किचन है ये मेडिवल टाइम्स के किचन को रिक्रिएट किया गया है। तो ये भी हम लोग कवर करेंगे। तो यहाँ कुछ कुछ एक छोटी सी मूवी प्ले होती है दोस्तों, यहाँ पर ही कुछ 4 मिनट की। यहाँ पर ही आप बैठ के वो एक तरह का इंट्रोडक्शन देते हैं, तो आप उसे सुन सकते हैं। सो दोस्तों, ये जो गिल्ड हॉल बनाया गया है, जो म्यूजियम बनाया गया है दोस्तों, ये पूरा गाइडेड टूर है। आपको यहाँ पर ही जैसे ही आप आते हैं तो आपको एक टैबलेट दे दिया जाता है, और टैबलेट के साथ साथ आपको एक ईयरफोन भी दिया जा सकता है, और बट आप स्पीकर में भी सुन सकते हैं। तो आप यहाँ पर ही बैठ के उसका बारे में जो हिस्ट्री है वो थोड़ा सा इंट्रोडक्शन यहाँ पर ही सुन सकते हैं 4 मिनट। इसमें वो भी एक्सप्लेन करते हैं कि कैसा कैसा जाना है इस गिल्ड हॉल में, और कैसे कैसे आपको फॉलो करना है, फर्स्ट किसको कवर करना है, फर्स्ट सेकंड किसको कवर करना है, सब कुछ वो एक्सप्लेन करते हैं। और थोड़ी बहुत हिस्ट्री भी बताते हैं, और बताते हैं कि लाइक आपको कैसे, जब जब आप कोई लोकेशन में जाओगे जैसे जोन से एरिया में, तो वहाँ एक स्कैनर रहेगा, उस स्कैनर को स्कैन करोगे तो वो जो आपको टैबलेट दिया जाएगा उसमें वो चीज़ एक्टिवेट होगा, और उसके बारे में पूरा हिस्ट्री बताया जाएगी। तो पूरा गाइडेड टूर है दोस्तों। मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा ये कॉन्सेप्ट पूरा, मतलब थोड़ा डिजिटल कर दिया गया है ये गाइड। यहाँ कोई गाइड की ज़रूरत नहीं है, आपको पूरा अपना गाइड आप अपने साथ लेके चल रहे हो थ्रू द टैबलेट, और वो बहुत इंटरेक्टिव है दोस्तों। आप बहुत ही इजीली आप इस जगह के बारे में जान सकते हो। तो मैं आगे दिखाऊंगा हाउ टू ऑपरेट दैट। तो तब तक के लिए यहाँ कुछ हिस्ट्री दी गई है, इन इसे पढ़ते हैं। सो दोस्तों, और एक बहुत बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग फैक्ट यहाँ का एक चीज़ पता चला कि ये एक तरह का हॉन्टेड हॉल की तरह से भी लोग इसको जानते हैं। तो कहा जाता है कि यहाँ जो किचन है ये पूरा मेडिवल एज का जो बना हुआ है। यहाँ पर ही कुछ दिन पहले लाइक एक घोस्ट देखा गया था। तो दोस्तों, यहाँ पर ही इस बोर्ड में यही एक्सप्लेन किया गया है कि हंगरी घोस्ट। सो आई डोंट नो लोगों का यहाँ का बिलीफ है, बट यहाँ जैसा लिखा गया है कि सम पीपल थिंक दैट द गिल्ड हॉल इज हॉन्टेड। I have seen a photo that was taken of a post dinner in the Great Hall. Standing next to the guest, you can see the ghostly figure of the monk. I don't know whether I believe in ghosts, but it's a spooky. It's so spooky. सो गाइज, यहाँ पर ही आपको थोड़ा बहुत हिस्ट्री, बैक इन हिस्ट्री लेके जाता है, जहाँ पर ही आपको हर डिफरेंट सेंचुरीज में कैसे ये गिल्ड हॉल डिफरेंट डिफरेंट लीडर्स के थ्रू पास हुआ, और लाइक क्या क्या चीज़ इवेंट्स हुए थे उस दरमियान, लाइक सब कुछ यहाँ एक्सप्लेन किया गया है। सो दोस्तों, जैसा कि मैं बता रहा था कि यहाँ पर ही एक गाइडेड टूर के लिए ये टैबलेट दिया जाता है। सो ये बहुत बड़ा ही इंटरेक्टिव और वेरी लाइक इंटरेक्टिव थीम के साथ ये दिया गया है। तो जनरली क्या होता है कि इसमें एक ऐप दिया गया है जिससे कि आपको इसके स्कैनर से ये जो एलिफेंट वाला जो चीज़ है इसको स्कैन करना पड़ता है, और आप यहाँ पर ही इसके बारे में हिस्ट्री में इसमें गाइडेड गाइडेड टैबलेट में आप सुन सकते हो। तो चलिए आपको लाइव सुनाता हूँ ये क्या बता।
Cooking smells. What you see today is a rare survivor of a medieval kitchen. The Guildhall was built between the 1340s and the 1420s and is believed that the kitchen was constructed in the latter part of that period. This is where the everyday suppers and grand dinners were prepared for the wealthy guild members and city leaders, who were often the same people. In 1617, it produced a notably fine banquet for a very important guest, King James I. Use the living history to see the preparations for the feast for King James I. But mind you don't get under cook's feet and have your guts for garters. Artifact Hunt will reveal more about the room and its features. And while you're here, don't forget to explore the activities on the kitchen table to discover more about the unusual food of the 1600s and the people who prepared it.
सो दोस्तों यहाँ पर नरेटेड गाइड यही एक्सप्लेन करता है कि ये जो किचन है बैक इन मेडिवल एज का है, जो पूरा रिक्रिएट किया गया है जो 14th सेंचुरी में किस तरह का था, यहाँ पर किस तरह से लोग खाना बनाते थे और क्या क्या फूड यूज़ करते थे खाना बनाने के लिए, और यहाँ पर क्या क्या यूटेंसिल्स यूज़ करते थे। तो ये फुल आपको एक एक्सपीरियंस देता है दोस्तों। सो अब दोस्तों हम ऊपर की ओर चलेंगे इस स्टेयर केस से, तो हम आगे देखेंगे ग्रेट हॉल। तो चलिए आप सभी को वहाँ लेके चलते हैं।
More than 500 years ago for the Guildhall, and today it remains Britain's earliest large-scale tapestry that still hangs in the place it was made for. It was probably woven in Tournai, then in France, but now part of Belgium. Beyond this, the tapestry is the subject of much debate. The most recent research has placed the date of manufacture between 50. Find and scan the Elephant and Castle room icon. This is the Great Hall, the largest and richest space in the Guildhall, used for guild business as well as legal hearings known as the Leet Court. But it was used for so much more, for assemblies and ceremonies, entertainments like plays and banquets and music. Although not strictly a religious building, the spiritual appeal is implicit in the name St. Mary's Guildhall. And look up to the roof and you'll see carved angels. You'll also find royal symbols, along with
Welcome.
We are before the spectacular Coventry Tapestry. It was commissioned by an author. I'm fascinated by.
तो ये है दोस्तों द ग्रेट हॉल। तो जैसा कि नरेशन में बताया जाता है कि ये जो ग्रेट हॉल वाला एरिया है, यहाँ पर ही लाइक बहुत सारे लाइक गैदरिंग्स होती थी, और ये जो आपको इसका जो आर्किटेक्चर देखने को मिल रहा है ये प्रॉपर वो 14th सेंचुरी का जो स्ट्रक्चर है वो अभी तक इस यहाँ पर ही रिस्टोर किया गया है। जो आपको फ्रंट वाले जो वॉल में आपको देखने को मिल रहा है वो है टेपेस्ट्री। सो दोस्तों यहाँ पर ही टेपेस्ट्री का मतलब होता है कि जो बड़े बड़े कर्टन्स वूवन करके वीव करके उसमें डिज़ाइंस पैटर्न्स बनाए जाते थे। सो जो मैंने आपको दिखाया मेरे पीछे जो बड़ी सी टेपेस्ट्री है उसको बनने में बहुत टाइम लगता है दोस्तों, टोटल 3 से 4 साल लगता है। यहाँ पर बहुत सारे कारीगर्स ये जो थ्रेड्स का यूज़ करके उसमें डिज़ाइंस और मतलब इंट्रिकेट डिज़ाइंस बनाते हैं जो कि आपको पूरा पर लाइक गॉडली।
We are before the spectacular Coventry Tapestry. It was commissioned more than 500 years ago for the Guildhall, and today it remains Britain's earliest large-scale tapestry that still hangs in the place it was made for. It was probably woven in Tournai, then in France, but now part of Belgium. Beyond this, the tapestry is the subject of much debate. The most recent research has placed the date of manufacture between 1505 and 1515. We know little, however, about who commissioned this Tudor tapestry or why. The figures in the 6 scenes of the tapestry are not identified by any known record of the time, but the central image is of the Virgin Mary at her Assumption into heaven, carried aloft by angels and surrounded by the 12 apostles, the followers of Christ. The scenes, or tableau, on the bottom row, with men on the left and women on the right, are thought to depict King Henry VI and his Queen Margaret of Anjou at prayer. The figures above them are saints. Scan the figures in Artifact Hunt to find out who the experts believe is depicted in the tapestry and hear their stories.
सो दोस्तों यहाँ पर हम आगे बढ़ते हैं और यहाँ पर ही देखने को मिलता है लेडी गोडाइवा का स्टैचू। सो लेडी गोडाइवा का जो स्टोरी रहा है दोस्तों, बहुत ही ज़्यादा पेट्रियाटिक रहा है। सो जब यहाँ पर ही ये जो किंग थे, जो प्रिंस थे, वो अब आम जनता पे बहुत ज़्यादा टैक्स लगा रहे थे। तो उस समय में बहुत आम जनता लोग रिवॉल्ट करने लग गए थे। तो उस समय में जो लेडी गोडाइवा थी प्रिंसेस, वो उस समय में किंग प्रिंस से बोलती है कि अगर आप इन आम जनता का जो टैक्स है उसे घटा दोगे तो उसके लिए मुझे क्या करना होगा। तो उस समय में जो प्रिंस था वो बोलता है कि अगर तुम बिना वस्त्रों के जो सिटी में अगर आप ऐसे घूमोगे तो मैं शायद कर दूंगा। तो इस बात को क्वीन गोडाइवा ने सच में इसे करके दिखाया, तो इसे एक बहुत बड़ा मोमेंट माना जाता है और लेडी गोडाइवा का यहाँ बहुत रिस्पेक्ट किया जाता है दोस्तों। सो ये सब में यही कुछ लिखा हुआ है। गोडाइवा started in 1678. He was 500 years after she died. The people think that getting on a horse naked may have meant something else a long time ago. Lady Godiva was very rich and would normally have worn very fine clothes and jewelries. Riding naked could have meant that she did not wear her best clothes and jewelries during the ride. Roger and Wendover mentioned Lady Godiva first. He wrote, then the Countess Godiva, Beatrice had got on her horse naked. Uh, let the hair fall from the band to cover all the body except her white legs. We do not know what he wore, what he wrote the book, but he died around 200 years after Godiva married Leofric.
सो गाइस, ये टेपेस्ट्री है। तो यहाँ टेपेस्ट्री में ये बड़ा सा पोस्टर जैसा जो दिख रहा है, ये एक्चुअली ये एक वूवन क्लोथ से बना हुआ है। तो इसमें ये सारे पेंटिंग जो भी आपको दिख रही है, ये वूवन किया हुआ है। बहुत ही अच्छा, बहुत ही सुंदर ये नज़ारा। ये आई थिंक क्वीन कैरोलिन है। जॉर्ज।
तो दोस्तों हम यहाँ से आगे बढ़ते हैं। तो ग्रेट हॉल से हम आगे बढ़ते हुए ये आगे का जो मिन्स्ट्रल्स गैलरी है, सो ये गैलरी में हम लोग आगे जाएंगे और यहाँ देखेंगे आगे क्या है।
St. George, according to tradition, was a soldier in the Roman army who was martyred on the 23rd of April in the year 303. He was made a saint at the end of the 5th century, but it wasn't until King Edward III adopted him as a patron in 1333 that he became important in England. St. George's role as the patron saint of England was sealed, even though he was born in Turkey and not Coventry, as one story has it. King Henry VI, the king the tapestry is thought to depict, had moved to Coventry for a time during the conflict known as the Wars of the Roses. He chose St. George as his patron saint, like his father Henry V had done before him. So showing St. George on the tapestry was one way of honouring these kings, especially Henry VI. Symbols, scales for balance, and a sword, a reminder of the swift and ruthless nature of justice. However, justice was not part of the tapestry when it was first made. It showed the Holy Trinity, the three forms of God that Catholics believed in: God the Father, His Son Jesus Christ, and His workings through the Holy Spirit, usually shown as a dove. Justice possibly appeared after the Reformation in the 16th century, when England became a Protestant country and Catholic churches' monasteries were destroyed. Other Catholic icons, such as rosary beads, were also removed from the tapestry, so it may mark the transition of the Guildhall from a centre for the Catholic guilds to a Protestant town hall. The portrait of Lady Godiva was painted in 1681 by local The portrait of King Charles I is one of the oldest paintings in the Guildhall, and an unusual one. It was painted around 1626, when Charles had been king for only a year. It's thought to be the only portrait that shows him holding Magna Carta. Magna Carta was a charter agreed in 1215 that set out the English people's right to justice and a fair trial. When Charles was put on trial in 1649 during the English Civil War, it was argued that he was ignoring Magna Carta against the public interest, common right, liberty, justice, and peace of the people of this nation. King Charles I remains the only British monarch to have been tried and executed for treason. The south window overlooking the courtyard was installed in 1888 in honour of a mayor of Coventry, Albert Samuel Thompson. This Gothic-styled stained glass window has different emblems of Coventry. In the centre, we see the elephant carrying a castle on its back again, Coventry's symbol of strength. Coventry was known to be using a seal with an elephant and castle as far back as 1351, and on the city arms from the early 17th century. It's also on the crest of Coventry City Football Club and Coventry Rugby Club. We're in the Prince's Chamber. It's another room in the Guildhall with a misleading name. It has nothing to do with princes. Instead, it's a literal translation of the Latin phrase Camera Principis, which is found on Coventry's civic coat of arms. The motto has been associated with Edward the Black Prince, grandson of King Edward II and Queen Isabella, who owned a manor house at Charlesmore, now a suburb of Coventry. Perhaps its use was a statement of loyalty to the crown. The Prince's Chamber has probably seen the most changes of function of any room in the Guildhall. It served as a buttery for storing drinks, as a muniment room for records, as a second council chamber, as the meeting room for the clothiers' company, and as an office for the town clerk and city archivist. Find and scan the Elephant Castle King James I, salvaged between 1901 and 1914 from a house that stood on the site of Coventry's Council House. The fireplace has blue and white English Delft tiles from the mid-1700s. Its carved surround is mostly older, dating from the early 17th century, like the wood panelling. The elaborately carved overmantel has columns, scrolls, and acanthus leaves. The frieze above has mythical beasts, and the bases have a fish scale design. In the Treasury. This is part of a medieval three-story tower, although the original date of its construction is unclear. Council chamber. If the Great Hall was the public face of the Guildhall, then the council chamber was its secret heart. It is one of the oldest rooms in the complex of buildings, although in its early days it was probably used as a store for food and drink. At some point it became the inner sanctum where the city leaders met to discuss council matters they wished to keep private. The city sergeant was posted at the door with his sword to keep people out. Luckily, records were kept in the leak book. If you can get past the city sergeant, see the living history of the council meeting. 1450 isn't so different to today. If you want to find out more about the room features and furnishings of the old council chamber, use Artifact Hunt. It's a Saturday morning in April 1450, but no one's feeling particularly spring-like. There's a sense of heightened anxiety caused by growing dissatisfaction amongst the people. Everyone is demoralized by the losses to the French in the ongoing 100 Years' War. People are weary. Rebellion is afoot. But the mayor is keen to establish some order and calm. Coventry needs to be ready to defend itself if necessary, and every man must do his bit. Things have been allowed to slide for too long. Ordinances, orders or rules, must be endorsed and recorded in the Coventry Leak Book, the main civic register, as a matter of urgency. Set up by the artist and designer William Morris, and continued after his death as part of the arts and crafts movement. As well as the trademark William Morris-inspired designs of entwined foliage and flowers, it has heraldic badges and emblems associated with kings and queens and historic figures of Coventry. The Black Eagle is the seal of Earl Leofric, Lady Godiva's husband. The three wheat sheaves represent the Earls of Chester, who once owned Coventry. In the mid-15th century and is one of the oldest items of furniture in the Guildhall. However, like much of the furniture in the Guildhall, it may have come from another Coventry building, possibly the Priory. Its intricate carvings include animals, angels, and on the tops of the arms, the Lions of England and Coventry's Elephant and Castle. The great chair has been in different rooms in the Guildhall, and one unlikely story is that the mayor and master of the guild squeezed onto it together. The stained glass window shows medieval figures and shields, but it dates from the 1930s restoration of the old council chamber. One figure is the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the other is Richard Sharp, the Mayor of Coventry, who you can meet again in the living history. When the original east window of the Great Hall was removed in the early 19th century, just two medieval heads were preserved. These eventually found their way into this window in 1930. Treasury. This is part of a medieval three-story tower, although the original date of its construction is unclear. It was known as Caesar's Tower from at least the 17th century, but it's not clear why. Maybe Caesar is a corruption of the word for treasure. Caesar, treasure, over to you. The stone walls and thick rib vaulting made it ideal for use as a strong room. Here they kept money, the city's precious documents and charters, the jewellery worn for official ceremonies, and maybe even the crown jewels at one point. It's largely been rebuilt as the tower was severely damaged in the Second World War. Stone blocks for the rebuilding came from excavation sites and demolished buildings in and around Coventry. Five muniment chests that contained all of Coventry's important documents. The last surviving one dates from the 13th century, and the remains of a wax seal. Before that, they were in Coventry Priory. They show God the Father, Jesus and Mary, St. Michael and St. Catherine. The eagle stands for St. John, and the angel is St. Matthew. It's thought that they were designed for a vertical screen, so they were removed from the old council chamber ceiling and redisplayed here. The wooden statue of St. George and the Dragon is a replica of a late 14th century original that's now in the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum.
सो दोस्तों हमने ग्राउंड फ्लोर कवर कर लिया है, अब हम ऊपर की ओर जाएंगे सेकंड फ्लोर कवर करने। तो ऊपर चलिए देखते हैं आगे क्या है।
In the armoury. This beautiful chamber was almost certainly never originally intended to store weaponry. In 1925, building renovations stripped back and revealed layers of its history, including the half-timbered wall overlooking the Great Hall, along with some surprises, which you'll find on points of interest. This room almost certainly dates to the early 15th century. By the late 16th century, it was used as a store for arms and armour. Inventories in the archives list some strange-sounding weapons and protective clothing, like corselets, vambraces, morions and sallets, along with more familiar daggers, scabbards, swords and pikes, kept on the minstrel's gallery. This all points to the increased sense of insecurity around the time of the Spanish Armada, the attempted invasion of England by Spain in 1588. The armoury later served as a lumber store and even as the drawing office of the city engineer. See what the parliamentarian soldier has to say for himself in his talking portrait.
The Cavaliers led the field in disarray, taking their dead and wounded with them. Only one of our brave fellows was taken, whilst another shot himself in the foot, being short of experience and long on stupidity. The people of Coventry supported our cause and bravely helped defend the city walls against any breach, after taking their arms and orders from St. Mary's Hall. I would tell you of their wonderful bravery in the face of the enemy, and the shouts of joy that came from the city streets after the enemy's retreat. Our ancient city walls stood firm, being the equals of that of London in both breadth and height. I hear that Leicester and Birmingham have suffered great atrocities at the hands of the enemy.
The low door with the Gothic pointed up.
This October, the King's nephew, Prince Rupert, demanded the city be handed over, but we were determined to deny His Majesty's desires. The Prince attacked the city with cavalry, but we repelled him with 26 pieces of cannon. My gun was amongst their number. Our cannons were positioned so as to annoy the enemy, and when the time came, we let fly. Many of the enemy's number were slain, and the Cavaliers fled the field in disarray, taking their dead and wounded with them. Only one of our brave fellows was taken, whilst another shot himself in the foot, being short of experience and long on stupidity. The people of Coventry supported our cause and bravely helped defend the city walls against any breach, after taking their arms and orders from St. Mary's Hall. I will tell you of their wonderful bravery in the face of the enemy, and the shouts of joy that came from the city streets after the enemy's retreat.
The low door with the Gothic pointed archway was bricked up until only about a century ago, when restorations revealed a winding staircase. 10 well-worn sandstone steps led up to another story of Caesar's Tower. We're in the Tower Room. This is one of the rooms in the Guildhall where Mary, Queen of Scots, is sometimes claimed to have been held prisoner. Mary was the cousin of Queen Elizabeth I and a rival claimant to the English throne. The Tower Room is rather prison-like. Stories started to circulate about Mary being held in this room. But between us, there's no real evidence she was ever here. The wall of the stair turret that once led up to a higher story can still be seen in the corner of the room. The anteroom was added in the 1420s to 30s when the Guildhall was altered. It's set over the main entrance into the Great Hall, above the gallery. It's uncertain what its original function was, but it probably provided an extra meeting room. The sloping floor gives an unsettling feeling, like being on a rolling ship. And at first it looks like there's only one way in and out of this room. But to the right of the windows, half hidden by a bench, is a door that once led to another room. Textiles designer Janet Stoyle in 2001. It continues the long tradition of commissioning tapestries for the Guildhall. It also evokes Coventry's cloth and weaving industry, from which grew its wealth, and 19th century plumbers who did much needed repairs also left a reminder of who they were. You can see where they've scratched their marks onto the latticed windows. We're on the Minstrels Gallery. Minstrels galleries were often found in great houses and civic buildings like this, usually overlooking the Great Hall or similar communal space. Minstrels were professional performers, usually musicians, who entertained the guests from this elevated platform. Coventry employed minstrels known as city waits, who played flutes and trumpets and stringed instruments like lutes and viols. In 1423, the city waits comprised 4 musicians who collected their own wages every 3 months from the inhabitants. You can see the living history in the Great Hall again from the Minstrels Gallery. We're on the King James I and his Minstrels galleries were often found in great houses and civic buildings like this, usually overlooking the Great Hall or similar communal space. Minstrels were professional performers, usually musicians, who entertained the guests from this elevated platform. Coventry employed minstrels known as city waits, who played flutes and trumpets and stringed instruments like lutes and viols. In 1423, the city waits comprised 4 musicians who collected their own wages every 3 months from the inhabitants of Coventry. Some people paid a penny, but if you lived in a cottage, you only had to contribute a halfpenny. As well as playing on the gallery, they were also employed as night watchmen in a city which had become bounded by strong walls and towers. You can imagine the sound of their soothing music drifting through the air between midnight and 4 a.m. You can see the living history in the Great Hall again from the Minstrels Gallery. See King James I and his guests enjoying the hall banquet is full of happy guests. Servants scurry to and fro, replenishing food platters and refilling goblets. On the top table or dais, King James I sits in the middle of the feast in almost splendid isolation, with no one opposite him, as was the courtly convention. Samuel Miles, the Mayor of Coventry, to his left, exhorts the king to more food and wine. His wife enjoys the attentions of him. It's an important date, the day of the first Battle of St. Albans, which sparked 3 decades of civil wars in England that came to be known as the Wars of the Roses. But the Mayor of Coventry and his officers don't.
सो दोस्तों इस वीडियो को यही एंड करते हैं। आशा करते हैं आपको ये वीडियो अच्छा लगा हो। सो लाइक शेयर सब्सक्राइब करना बिल्कुल ना भूले और मिलते हैं हम नेक्स्ट ब्लॉग पे। थैंक